on travel, of course, I tend to try and show my superiority by saying, I was in that country and I know all about it. And sometimes people wonder who's the guest and who's the interviewer. I'm happy to say for the next 30, 40 minutes or so, I won't say a word because I know nothing about the destination we're going to talk to. And more importantly, I'm going to talk to somebody who really knows his onions. It is the World Affairs editor at the BBC, John Simpson, who is in the studio. John, welcome to the programme.
Thank you, George. It's so nice to see you.
And I think the first time you've been in this studio, with me anyway.
Certainly with you. I've been in here with somebody else.
Now, Iran, holiday destination.
I know.
When I heard this, I said, Simpson's playing me up here.
Well, the thing is, when your colleague got on to me and said, where would I like to go to pretty weird places, and I was going to say Afghanistan. But it won't be a huge surprise to you to know that the tourist minister in Afghanistan is virtually unemployed. I mean, I did once say I got irritated at one of these sort of fairs that they have, for tourist destinations, and all these people talking about crap places like Dubai and places I really hate. And so they said to me, where do you want to go? And I just said, well, Afghanistan. And then I thought, it was pretty stupid, actually, to have said that, because they're all going, nobody there is going to go to Afghanistan. About 6 months or a year later, can't remember when it was, I was doing some filming in the middle of Kabul, and an old man that I can say this on Irish radio because he won't be listening, I thought he looked like a sort of bundle of rags, came shouting out at me and saying, John Simpson, John Simpson. So I looked across and I said, yes. And he said, my wife and I, there was another bundle of rags behind him. And he said, my wife and I heard you talking about how wonderful Afghanistan was. And we've been all over the country and we've had the most fantastic time. And thank you, thank you, thank you. So I thought, well, for a moment of irritation, I've at least made their holiday. But, Afghanistan, there are bits of Afghanistan you can go and have a nice holiday.
But Iran.
But Iran, Iran is actually a possibility. That's the thing. It really is. It's a small business, the business of Western people going to Iran. But it is possible. It is quite easy. It's not even that expensive, and it's a wonderful country.
So we start off presumably because there are no direct flights by Aer Lingus. So we start off from London. British Airways fly into somewhere?
No. I don't know. I'm not quite sure who does. I think probably Dubai, the place I've just been.
All right. Emirates will probably take it there.
Yeah, I think
so. All
so.
right. Okay.
Yes.
So, like, when you go there.
Well, you see, I'm banned from going there. I mean, that's why I would love to go there, because I'm banned.
They've banned you, have they?
They've banned me. I was there in 2009 when they had a presidential election. People came out on the streets for days upon days upon days. Several people killed. And I was there and I watched the whole thing. And by the end of it, by the last 2 or 3 days, I was the only foreign journalist there. And they really took against that.
Who tried to blow you up? Was it the Iranians or the Iraqis? Or who tried to blow you?
Well, it was the Americans, actually. Yeah.
You were in the car, but it was in Iraq. All right.
Yes,
so the capital city is what?
The capital city is Tehran, which is not a very attractive place. It's vast. It must be one of the biggest cities in the world. It sprawls right up the mountainside. But it's the rest of the country that is so absolutely fantastic.
Because we're kind of now travelling. There's a kind of time travelling thing here, isn't there? We're going back to the ancient civilizations. So do we have evidence of that when we're travelling around this country?
You are not kidding. It's the place is Persepolis, was the city that Alexander the Great, for some reason, burned. I can't remember why he burned it. And it was the old capital of the Persian Empire, Darius the Great and all these people. And even after Alexander had finished burning it, a lot of it was still there. And they're some of the most magnificent ruins I've ever seen in my whole life.
Because we're talking about Persia, aren't
yes,
we? We forget this sometimes with the name changes of countries.
We always used to call it Persia, and then the Shah of Iran, the last Shah of Iran, for some reason or another, I think wanted to call it Iran. Or I think his dad did. His dad was pretty much of a Nazi sympathizer, and so he had the idea that it's something to do with Aryan. It's Iran and Aryan are the same word.
Now, the Persians are what? I mean, what are they speaking here when we go?
They speak a language which is very much akin to our own. I mean, it's an Indo-European language, quite easy to understand actually and learn. I put a lot of effort into learning it years and years ago, and now I've forgotten it all just about. But it's a lovely, fluent language, which, because they were taken over at one stage by the Arabs, has been sort of forced into an Arabic kind of a sort of straitjacket. So a language which actually has nothing to do with the Arabic script is now written in Arabic.
When I heard young Simpson was coming in to talk about Iran, I said...
I'm 3 years younger than you.
Right, I said, I can't believe he's going to talk about it. Now, but here's the interesting thing. All these Irish people have been there. Can't wait to go back to go skiing.
There you are. Skiing, it's pretty good. I mean, I'm not a skier myself, but I've seen all the slopes, and I've seen the setup. I mean, the après ski is not fantastic unless you like hot milk, but the rest of it is lovely and wonderful people. I tell you, I've never loved people so much in a difficult country as I've loved them in Iran.
When we're talking travel, I mean, I have to say Mr. and Mrs. Hook are pretty sort of conservative, and we only fly to where the British Empire still rules, you know what I mean? So there is absolutely no chance of us going to Iran, okay? But what about the scary part of it, for people listening?
There's no scary part.
There is no
scary part. Okay, can I tell you two stories?
Right.
I was there on a holiday years ago this was, but not that many years ago. And we were staying in North Tehran, and we were going down to the south of the country. So we had to go right through the whole of Tehran. It took nearly 2 hours. Awful traffic, evil traffic. And as we sort of got out into the open countryside, I realized I left my passport behind. And we were going to be gone for a week of traveling around in places that could have been difficult. This was the height of the tension between the West and Iran. And I turned to my then girlfriend and said to her, well, you know, what should we do? And she said, let's just risk it. And so we did, rather than go all the way back and pick up the passport. We had a fantastic time. And every time the police would often stop us and say, where's your passport? And I'd say, oh, I left it back in Tehran. And they'd laugh and they'd wave us on. You see about the British Empire. Britain, of course, my wife, who's South African, maintains that the Brits have kicked doors in every country in the world, and she's right. They particularly kick doors in Iran, but people have a real affection for British and Irish people in Iran.
Well, you cover both boxes, British and Irish. You living in Ireland and all that. Lufthansa go there, according to Hugh. Joe says you can go via Istanbul with Turkish Airlines.
That's the nicest way.
Jean went there last year. Stunning. One of the friendliest countries she's ever been.
Good for her.
You can also fly to Tehran with Air France.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's how I flew when I went back with the Ayatollah Khomeini when he returned from exile there. We flew
Now,
on an Air
Viv
France
in Cork asks an important question, which may be slightly outside your scope of knowledge. What about single women going to places like Iran on holiday?
It's more difficult for single women.
Because
not
women
impossible.
presumably still have to, I mean, even Iranian women presumably still have difficulty in terms of work and all that sort of stuff.
No, actually not. No, and it's a country where women drive a lot. I mean, I knew an American woman who lived there on her own, and she never had any problems at all. I think in the cities you just have a little bit more. There's always a danger of being hassled a bit, but if you cover your head, if you don't mind doing that as a woman, then there's no real problem. And the mere fact of being a Westerner means that you get automatic respect and friendship from people.
Okay, one of the things apparently I heard recently was people decide what hotel they're going to stay in based on the quality of the breakfast and the quality of the Wi-Fi. Now, I mean, have we, like our Mr. Hilton and Mr. Marriott and are all these guys in Iran?
No Marriott. There's a Hilton, or what used to be a Hilton. They're all taken over by the government.
Okay.
The nicer places to stay are the smaller places, actually, because they tend to be better, in particular with Wi-Fi. Breakfast is pretty rubbish, actually, I have to say.
Food generally very different than what we might be used to.
Yes, it is. But once you try real Persian food, you'll never forget it. In
what
London,
are you talking about? I mean, when you talk Persian food, what are the kind of star sort of things that you have?
Well, they have. It's kind of carefully positioned between India and the Middle East, and so there's a lot of rice-based dishes, a lot of fantastic chicken dishes with beautiful vegetables and fruit. There's one of my favourite dishes at all in the world is one that's based on chicken and pomegranate seeds. Absolutely gorgeous, and I'd go a long way. Well, I suppose.
But are you an adventurer food-wise as well as traveller?
Not less now than I used to be. I quite like to try these things.
Okay, so we've got Tehran, which you don't like. So you fly in, get out. Presumably there's the local Avis, is there, that we can rent the cars that are bought?
Yeah.
Do we need a driver? I remember going to Sri Lanka and it told me, don't rent a car, get a driver.
Yeah, that's what I'd say in Iran. It's, the roads are dodgy. People drive like maniacs. There are lots of freeways and everything. I used to think it was like being in Southern California on acid. I mean, they drive. They've got all these freeways. Everybody lives in their cars. The cars are the big thing, and they drive like maniacs. Much better to have somebody. I've got a wonderful driver whom I've had since the 70s, and he still drives me around.
The main cities then, I mean, you mentioned Persepolis, was it?
Persepolis,
burned by Alexander, so, okay, that's a ruin. Any cities that you particularly like to visit?
I mean, Isfahan is the loveliest city, one of the loveliest cities in the world.
Really?
I mean, it's one of these sort of UNESCO heritage places, and absolutely sensational.
Interestingly, that's Tony in Dublin saw you doing a programme walking around the Great Bazaar in Isfahan.
Yes, did he? How nice of him to remember. Yes, I did that, and I've done a lot of stuff. I tell you one other story. It was the height of the sort of the anger that seemed to be in Iran, where every day we saw pictures on our screens, television screens, of people shouting "Death to America, death to Britain, death to Margaret Thatcher." actually sometimes rather inclined to sympathise with that one. And we went to a demonstration outside the British Embassy. Vast, great. There must be about 10 or 12,000 people there. It seemed very angry, and there were people beating their chests and chanting "Mag Bar Anglia," which is death to Anglistan, death to England. And then also they were shouting death to Thatcher. And I got my cameraman to stand up on a low wall, and he was a very nice bloke, an older bloke, and he said to me, and I said, look, I'll walk through the crowd and you film me from there. He said, John, look, I don't think this is a good idea. Would you just, as a favour to me, don't do it, because I think it's too dangerous for you. And I'd actually seen, I didn't tell him this, of course, but I'd seen an American journalist do exactly the same thing, and it worked a treat. Television journalist worked a treat. So I said, trust me, I having seen it happen. And I walked through the crowd, and they were chanting, "Death to England, death to England." And then I'd say, well, hello, I'm from England, I'm from the BBC. And they'd stop. One man kissed my hand. They were just absolutely fantastic. And if that's what an anti-British demonstration is like, well, the rest of the country, you can imagine.
What about the size of the country? I mean, how big is it? How big is Iran? Can you contextualise that at all?
I'm not very good on those things. You know, people always say it's 3 times the size of Wales or something. Wales seems to be a sort of measuring.
So it's not a huge land.
No, it is it's a big country.
Is it?
Big country.
Now, I seem to remember a place called Tabriz or something.
Tabriz, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
What's that like?
Well, again, it's a charming, rather dusty, charming place. It's a sort of desert city. With I haven't been there for some time now, but also with wonderful mosques and a fantastic central Maidan, a central square to it. I mean, I really recommend it, George. And you know, it's adventurous to go there, but it's not dangerous. You know, you understand the difference.
Well, now, when you went there, admittedly, you were all organised by the powerful travel department of the BBC and Shepherd's Bush, who organised everything.
Well,
for
there's just one girl, you know, who says,
well,
who
where
says,
do you go,
is
Mr.
Iraq
Simpson?
the same as Iran, you know?
Well, we rang a couple of travel agencies right before you came in, and they weren't exactly they didn't have package holidays to Iran in the window at any rate. This would be adventurous also, I imagine, in the sense of sort of planning it. I mean, what about the possibilities of 2 daredevil travellers getting in their car and driver, and then you pick up a hotel as you go along? You'd still support that, would you?
Oh, absolutely, and I've done that many, many times. You just because the tourist industry is tiny there. For the most part, you don't have any problems getting into any hotel anywhere, and you just see where you like. And you know, it's not going to be the Ritz, but it's going to be clean, and it's going to be pleasant, and they'll look after you nicely.
Now, you got to remember, John, that we got 2 people in this studio. One is sort of Marco Polo, right? And
Marco Pierre White.
And I'm Marco Pierre White. I'm not going to budge out of a 5-star with central heating or air conditioning or whatever while you whiz around the country risking life and limb. To be fair, if you're going to go on holiday in Iran, I suspect you've got to be reasonably okay with the idea of not knowing necessarily where you're going to sleep tomorrow, which would send me into paroxysms of grief.
It wouldn't. And the thing is, you'll be fine. I mean, you can plan it out beforehand if you need to. There are plenty of all you need to go. You fly to Tehran, you stay there. There are good hotels in Tehran, nice, big, expensive, pretty much modern hotels, and then you just find a travel agent there who'll fix the whole thing up. And everybody in Tehran at a certain kind of middle-class people will mostly speak English.
I was going to wonder about that because I was just thinking it's Farsi. I was trying to think of the name. Isn't that what the language is? Isn't it?
Yes. No, absolutely,
Farsi.
Farsi.
But English is reasonably prevalent.
Yes, it is. It is. A lot of people speak English, good English.
What did your insurer say to you then when you sort of said, listen, I'm off to Iran or whatever?
Well, I neglected to go and see him or her. I'm not a great one for insurance because my experience of insurance is you pay through the nose and whatever it is that's happened to you isn't covered, So I tend to sort of think I'm on my own.
What's the currency?
The rial.
Okay.
Which is pretty low now. I think I'm right in saying it's about 400 to the dollar, I think.
Okay.
Or might be the pound.
So, give or take, 400 to pound, dollar, euro, give or take. Does your euro go pretty far then? I mean, if you do you get lunch for it? How much does lunch cost you?
Well, I haven't now sadly been there for 5 years, and inflation's been working away at the country really quite badly. But I mean, that of course is if you go with that, but with a pocket full of euros, that's in your favour very, very much. I mean, it's not an expensive country; it's a low price country, and I've sort of haggled in carpet stores and in sort of antiquities places, and after a bit, I've thought, why am I bothering to try and cut these things back?
It's interesting you say this. I remember being somewhere and arguing the toss forever. And then I suddenly discovered I've been arguing toss about £2, or whatever.
Yes. Then you feel quite mean, don't you? It's sort of small time.
It's the same with tipping. Like you suddenly discover, will I give him 50 in his currency or 75? And then you discover you're talking about tuppence. Point, because you'd mentioned Dubai, which brought it to mind. What's the attitude to alcohol?
Well, there's two attitudes to alcohol. One is you can have the bejesus knocked out of you for drinking anything or being found with anything.
Right.
That's the official line. But it's that kind of country, and you can buy it, but you've got to be careful. You've got to know who you're buying it from. The fact is that there are a lot of there's a sizable proportion of Christians there, Armenian Christians who lived there for centuries, and because they're Christian, they're allowed to drink and they're allowed to make it. And if you can make contact with them, it's called rocket fuel. It's fairly fierce.
Is it?
It is, but it's after about the fifth one, it's really good. When your mouth goes numb.
An Irish fan cycled across Iran for charity on his way to Beijing for the Olympics, and he's always raved about how welcoming the people there.
Fantastic. Good for him too. What a thing to do.
Yeah,
lovely.
Funny enough, I met him recently, but a few years ago I was in Cape Town, and these 4 young lads and a girl, amazingly enough, had cycled from Egypt to Cape Town, and I was more amazed that a girl had done it, but they were fantastic. But it's one thing about 2 adults going. What about if you decide to go there en famille? I mean, you're taking kids.
I would take my kid. I certainly would. Yes. He's a very well-travelled kid anyway, and I think, it's always been my experience that kids open people up, they like it even more. And as long as you look after what he's eating and he or she is eating, that's okay. As long as you're careful on the roads. I mean, the roads are the problem really in Iran because people drive like lunatics.
Well, having been to Sri Lanka, I can just imagine. I mean, I would not have survived Sri Lanka if I was
if you were driving.
You just wouldn't survive.
I've driven there, and afterwards I thought, I don't want to ever do this again. I mean, and exactly as you were saying earlier, for a few euros, you can hire somebody to do it all for you and take all the stress for you.
I can't have you in either, though, because of your vast knowledge of the subject. I mean, Iran itself, though, I mean, you're painting a kind of a picture of this lovely place, which is at odds with the kind of political picture that has been painted.
Absolutely.
How does that work? How do these two sort of contradictory features work there?
Well, the system is a very rough and tough, rather nasty system, and it's still there. The fact is they've now got a very liberal new regime, but as we've seen in the past, when they've had liberal presidents, they've had two in the past, and they can never really make the system work for them, because the system just operates regardless of who's voted for whom, and it's not a nice system. And it's they control things, but when you're dealing with ordinary people, 80% of them vote for again and again and again vote for the liberal candidate when they've got a chance, and this time they've got a very good president. I think, if he's able to kind of do anything about the system itself, if he can only control it.
It's interesting you were talking about a friend of yours. Was it your wife who said the British should kick down more doors around the globe? Yeah, your wife, yeah. And they have, of course. The background here of the great empire, when Churchill was in his pomp and all that sort of stuff.
Went there, of course, to Tehran. Yeah.
And to meet Roosevelt, wasn't that right? And Stalin?
Yeah, and Stalin.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, you can still see the place when they did it.
Really?
In the British Embassy, yeah, fantastic.
Now, are there remnants of that sort of empire still? I mean, do you see? I know when you go to India, and India's not a very good example because, of course, the Raj, Britain and all that, but you do go to certain countries where somehow, I mean, I remember going to Raffles, in Singapore and thinking, this is probably the way it was in 1940.
Yeah.
Is there that sort of remnant at all in the British Empire?
Well, the British kind of ran Iran without they pulled the strings.
It was run by the British Petroleum Company.
That's right.
Wasn't that right? It was a kind of it was kind of just a petro company.
Yes, it was. Yes, and that's particularly true in the south. And in the south, I mean, there's a lot of old-fashioned architecture of the kind that we have here, or you have in Britain. It's mostly in buildings, really, and but it's above all, it's in people's attitudes. I never can understand it. The Brits have behaved appallingly in every country in the world, as my wife says, and yet mostly people have a very high view of them. So when you say you're British, they tend to have a picture in their minds of bowler hats and umbrellas and honest dealing and all the kind of stuff we gave up years ago.
Yeah, I mean, we won't get into it, but it is true that when you go to certain countries, the British are held in higher esteem than Germans or Belgians or Dutch or French or other colonizers. Yes. You particularly find that in Britain, in Africa, that the British somehow have sort of got over that. But you'll have to remind me, because I haven't looked at a map today. Landlocked or not?
Yeah, well, almost. I mean, it's on the Caspian Sea.
There's the Gulf of something, or is other?
Yes, it's on the Caspian Sea and it's on the Gulf.
Right.
So you've got this. I mean, the Caspian is actually a lake, but it's so large it's like a sea in the north, and you've got the Gulf in the south. But it feels landlocked when you're there, because those are the extremes of the country. And I mean, I've never driven down, for instance, to the Gulf. I've flown down to it, but I've never driven down in Iran. I just wish the so-and-sos had let me back, George. I mean, they've got a thing about the BBC. They've got a thing about me. they've got a thing about Britain, they've got a thing about the West, and that doesn't leave me much scope somehow.
Well, thank you for calming my fears in Iran. What I'll do is, next time we meet, I'll tell you what's good about Dubai. Why you should go there. My thanks to John Simpson, World Affairs Editor, of course, of the BBC, as my guest on Tuesday Travel.